Okay, guys, welcome back to the Economic Apocalypse Update, and I'm here to guide you through the end of the financial world one day at a time. So the energy situation is bursting once more, and we need to talk about it. Now, before we end the year, two shocks threaten both Europe and the United States. As commodities users and producers, China and Russia are set to wreak havoc on the G7. Let's start with China's significant reduction in energy imports from the United States. For many years, America has been sending oil to China. The Chinese were really the second largest purchaser of U.S. crude. Beijing has already purchased an astonishing 450,000 barrels per day in 2023, more than doubling its 2022 capacity. China was coming out of lockdowns, so they needed a lot of energy to kickstart the economy and increase industrial output. As a result, China became the second largest importer of U.S. crude in 2023 after only the Netherlands. Chinese purchases exceeded those of South Korea, the United Kingdom, and Taiwan combined. This is a very crucial truth since things have taken a dramatic turn this year in 2024, particularly when Biden opted to expand the economic war with China. Remember the penalties on advanced chips. Can we all recall the solar panel and electric vehicle tariffs? Now, Biden attempted to undermine China's crucial manufacturing sectors. Significant tax rises of at least 25% or perhaps 50%. Electric vehicles received a 100% import tax. Yellen and her pals chose to intensify the dispute. Yeah, China isn't having it. They're fighting back and weaponizing their own industrial demand. Now, if you want to prevent us from bringing finished goods into the United States, we'll play the same card and lessen our dependency on U.S. energy inputs. We will drive you into an impossible situation. Now, China has reduced its purchases of U.S. oil by 46%. U.S. oil exports to Chinese firms decreased from 150 million barrels to less than 82 million, dropping China from second to sixth place in terms of imports. This makes Europe the second largest destination for U.S. crude oil, and things are becoming a lot clearer. This is why Trump is insisting that the EU buy more American oil and gas, as Chinese demand is beginning to decline as a direct result of the trade war. You might be wondering why this matters. The United States can always sell energy to its friends and allies, but it is important. China's reduction in demand for Western energy confirms a market split. First, where does China acquire its oil imports? Well, it is coming from Russian energy resources. Let's not forget about Russia and China, who are neighbors. Their pipeline is put up, and Putin isn't going to sanction Xi's energy supply to the economy. Now, Russia is China's largest crude supplier, accounting for approximately 20% of the Chinese market. Beijing buys almost 2.1 million barrels per day, which is 5 times the amount it imports from the United States. This is a major issue for the petrodollar system, among others. This method now settles oil payments in dollars, which is problematic because China and Russia no longer trade in the reserve currency. China's refineries have no trouble settling bilaterally. They pay Russian suppliers in cash using the RMB. Russia, of course, will take the yuan and the RMB to import their own products from Chinese companies. As the Chinese economy expands and home demand rises, there will be an energy boom. Beijing will receive this from Russian oil and gas, while U.S. energy will be avoided. The fact that China is no longer purchasing U.S. commodities is an issue. In July, Chinese demand for oil dropped overall, increasing price sensitivity. In other words, China and Asia in general desired cheap oil. Now that petroleum from the United States must go across the Pacific, including through the Panama Canal, the cost of U.S. exports increases. At one time, oil from the West cost about $2 more per barrel, which was a lot. Refining margins might be exceedingly narrow. As a result, Asian refiners, particularly those that feed China, must source supplies closer to home, which includes crude oil from the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia and, of course, Russia. So, if Trump maintains his trade battle with China, Beijing's retaliation would be pretty predictable. They will continue to drive demand for U.S. crude and divert Asian consumption. And this is not good for the petrodollar system. China buys and sells in RMB, and Russia also bills in RMB, leaving the dollar in the cold. Does this indicate the framework will collapse? Well, it depends. This is a major reason why Trump is anxious to get Europe to buy massive amounts of U.S. energy via LNG. I'm not arguing that a major motivation may be to reduce the EU's trade imbalance with the United States. However, Trump is also attempting to guarantee that U.S. oil remains in high demand at premium rates. As long as the EU buys expensive energy, the U.S. will continue to profit handsomely, which is important for huge gas corporations that are counting heavily on exports in 2025 and beyond. The United States plans to nearly treble its LNG export capacity by 2028. An extra 10 billion cubic feet per day are scheduled to come online over the following 4 years. Unlike Russia, which has a lower production cost, the United States needs to keep demand for LNG strong. So if BRICS consolidates and obtains all of their energy, or at least the majority of it, from the Middle East and Moscow U.S. energy producers, they will be in danger. And that is why we can anticipate Trump to exert immense pressure on the Europeans to purchase their oil and gas. While the United States is the world's largest gas exporter and oil producer, the problem is one of cost. Getting energy out of the earth is not costly, and it is not just the Russians who are putting pressure on American energy. LNG production in Qatar might cost as little as 30 cents per million BTU. However, in other countries, notably the United States, it is substantially more, ranging from $2 to $3 to $5. This is why Chinese demand is vital. Beijing's independence from the United States might result in a new energy war. As previously said, this might have a negative impact on the dollar. I now like talking about oil because I previously worked in the sector. I began off as a chemical engineer, so the mechanics of all these large movements fascinate me. And the United States' condition appears to be quite fragile. They require Europe as a captive client more than ever. In addition, Europe is facing its own energy crises. Energy flows are slowly being choked off. First, there is the Yamal-Europe pipeline, which has halted gas shipments. This is according to Putin. The flows to the Yamal pipeline have ceased. The flow of gas into the EU is becoming increasingly restricted. Big industrial economies, such as Germany, are already struggling. Deindustrialization is in full swing as access to inexpensive energy is hampered. As we all know, gas flows from Nord Stream have entirely halted. Just below it, the flow to Yamal via Poland has also stopped. As a result, neither of these two pipelines delivers any gas to the European Union. What remains is gas flowing through the Turk Stream and the Ukraine transit. So, if those two are closed, Europe will no longer have access to inexpensive pipeline energy. Yes, as the headline suggests, the EU is about to face a major problem. First and foremost, it is critical to grasp the risks that Europe is facing. In 2025, the EU will face China, which is rapidly globalizing and industrializing. And this means that manufacturing is set to become extremely competitive, and you need every edge you can get, particularly cheap energy. That's a large industrial input. But the EU is depleting its gas supply at an alarming rate. Winter is coming, and it is depleting their stockpiles. EU storage levels are at 75% and decreasing rapidly. In comparison, it was over 90% in December of the previous year. And, like all reserves, you'll need to refill them before next winter. So, what does this do? It puts increased pressure on gas prices in Europe, particularly if they are obliged to purchase pricey US LNG. The tale actually gets worse from here. The Ukraine-Russia gas transportation agreement is poised to collapse. Russian gas supplies to Ukraine may cease by 2025. Russia has also lost up on finding a solution, and Gazprom anticipates a complete closure in 2025. Ukraine does not want to renew it because they believe it promotes the Russian economy. However, Certain nations in Europe will be hit harder than others. We only need to consider those who are in grave danger. Remember what's at risk here, guys. Industrial production affects the whole economy. And if the economy collapses and jobs and incomes are at stake, you don't have to be a genius to figure this out. Stopping gas transit via Ukraine will have an impact on Slovakia and Hungary, among other nations. And this is why the eastern countries are panicking. Supply via the Suza line might be halted in a couple of days. And these countries rely heavily on cheap Russian energy. Overall, the EU will suffer. The EU Commission now claims that the suspension of gas shipments will have a minor impact. However, this might be the final straw. And that is why I enjoy numbers. We can simply calculate the damage, especially in the current energy crisis. In the first 8 months of 2024, 112 terawatt-hours of energy were delivered via Ukraine transit. That equates to 5% of all EU imports. That's half of all Russian pipeline gas entering the EU, but here is the rug. This 5% represents inexpensive gasoline supplies. And if this goes away, Europe will have to replace it with more expensive choices, most likely US LNG. Even if Europe substitutes the pipeline gas from Russia with Russian LNG, costs will rise. So this is a lose-lose situation for Europe. The situation is so severe that Slovakia has had enough. They're threatening Ukraine with power outages if Russian gas stops coming. Will they do it now? We've got no idea. However, it emphasizes the importance of the EU economy's current situation. And whether Brussels wants to accept it or not, the continent is still largely fueled by Russian energy. And if this happens and Ukraine cuts down the supply, the winners are clear. Asian countries, particularly India and China, will win handsomely. Gas pumps will be obliged to move fuel eastwards, lowering prices in Beijing due to fundamental supply and demand. This, unfortunately, puts more pressure on Western industry. Now, Chinese goods would be much more inexpensive. So the energy situation is a disaster. It is one of several dominoes that might fall and cause a collapse. China's dumping of US oil is not good. The Russian supply exiting the EU is considerably worse. But tell me what you think. Will China reduce even more US oil imports? Will Ukraine block the transit of Russian gas to Europe? Please let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to like and subscribe as we navigate these tumultuous times.